Well, now I want to have an announcement of a new build along that we're going to have on the show. It is actually going to start December the 6th show. It's going to be a kit that Dylan Lambert manufactures. And Earl Hackett is going to actually do the model building of the kit on the show. Well, both Dylan and Earl are here this evening. So Dylan, I'll turn it over to you first and let you talk about your company a little bit and about what this model that Earl's going to be building on the show is all about.
All right. So I'm Dylan Lambert. As some of you longtime viewers may have at least heard my name or occasionally see my face. So Lambert Locomotive Works, I got started with Owen 30. That said, I've been expanding into other areas. HO is a more recent one because there was basically low-hanging fruit there, and that was basically presented by this car. So to basically go along with this TED Talk, first, I'm going to apply the Socratic method. What is the Boston and Albany? Okay, pretty simple. The Boston and Albany is a railroad between Boston and Albany. Okay, bad joking aside. The Boston and Albany people might think of as, oh, that's where the first superpower steam locomotive showed up. That's the major a major historical footnote. But the B&A was more than just a mountain railroad. The B&A was also a very urban railroad, at least in the Boston area. So I pulled up this little map to kind of help illustrate it. This is an older one from years ago that I found using the wonders of Google because I couldn't find a better one that really showed what we're talking about. So when you look at the legend and then you look at the area out in Boston, you're going to notice, one, there's a lot of track in Boston. Two, there's a lot of branches in Boston. Now, Boston was basically commuter country for the Boston and Maine, the New Haven, and the B&A, although there was other railroads in play until basically the Boston and Maine and New Haven merged into what they became after the 1900s. The B&A was always really more or less the B&A. It was originally the Boston and Worcester to start before the three railroads that built out to Albany were combined into one company. But traffic in the Boston area was always a major, as far as commuter train, or what we would call a commuter train today, was major for them. Commuter country basically ran from what is now South Station out as far as Framingham and then along the branches. People who are familiar with Boston know the Green Line, the trolleys. The D branch was originally part of the B&A's Boston area commuter network. It was basically created a giant loop that commuter trains would run out and back on to South Station in both directions. But their commuter country more or less ended at Framingham. What we consider commuter country today going out to Worcester a century ago really wasn't the case. So the 1920s roll along. Wooden cars are still a thing. There's still, a need for more equipment. So the B&A, having access to a car builder in Worcester, Osgood Bradley, which later became part of Pullman, went to Osgood Bradley and said, we need a commuter coach that, for whatever their reasoning was, whether it be to get rid of wooden cars or they just needed more cars. One of the problems with the B&A is the reasoning for why they did what they did. It's not easy to track down that documentation if you can find it all, if it still exists. But the B&A goes to Osgood Bradley. They're like, we need commuter coaches. So they came up with this. This was basically the first of 80 cars of this basic pattern that the B&A would own. And in essence, they were 100-seat coaches. Seats are the operative word here. That basically you stuff as many people in that car as possible and you get your commuter trains in and out of South Station. Now, when I say sitting, I mean that for a reason. As the B&A cars were built, I'm going to jump ahead real quick. You could see that there was standing room in the end of these cars where you could probably easily fit 15 people in either end of the car. There were no bathrooms. There's a decent ventilation system built into the car, which some secondhand owners would later really like. But these were essentially simple, easy to, simple cars meant to get people in and out of Boston because there were so many of them. So train of 8 cars, congratulations. You've got basically 800 plus people that you're getting out of South Station to go along your commuter corridor. The basic design didn't stay with the B&A long, though. The New York's, as many of us know, the New York Central owned the Boston and Albany, or at least leased it. It's basically, they might as well have owned it. The New York Central has had what they called the Putnam Division out of New York City, where they ordered 24 coaches for that route, or I'm sorry, not 24, 30, basically about 30 cars of the coaches for that, but there were some modifications. The B&A cars were even simpler than the New York the ones built for the Putnam Division. There were no vestibule doors. There were no diaphragms. It was basically an open gang plate, brass platform gates that someone would open, and some handrails. New York Central's like, obviously they decided they wanted doors, they wanted diaphragms, but they also took the design a little bit further in that they had combines, because the Putnam Division did have a need for it because it was less of a commuter operation. And they had a version unique to the Putnam Division in this. There was only 2 of these built, and there was only one of the combines built for the New York Central. But this was basically an RPO with a baggage section and some passenger seats. You know, they were treating the design as a basis for a proper coach, as more of a coach and less of a commuter coach. For instance, these cars, especially the combine, the one combine that was built for Putnam, a bunch of the coaches from that division were taken and modified in the 1930s to create the New York Central's Mercury Streamliner. That was all built with these cars. They took them out to their shops, redid them, sent them out there. Now, the New York Central cars, of course, had bathrooms in the space where there would have been standing room, the baggage space, more baggage space, an extra toilet was in the RPO cars, and of course, RPO space. Now, while the New York Central and B&A were basically where the design got started, this is kind of where history diverges a little bit into a tangent, because the Chicago and Northwestern picked up a bunch of clones. Now, theirs were weird in the sense that they were using a lot of aluminum in their construction, where the B&A and New York Central cars didn't. Of the surviving cars of this pattern, 3 of the 5 cars are actually Chicago Northwestern combines, just because there were more of them. The Chicago Northwestern, basically, between them, the New York Central, and the B&A, there was probably just over 200 cars of this basic pattern floating around in major metropolitan areas. So you got 3 main railroads that own these things. There was more railroads that ended up picking them up, though. So the Chicago Northwestern did sell a lot of theirs off rather quickly. But the B&A and New York Central cars did go around, and this is where you start seeing weird stuff. One of the highlights of that was the Boston and Maine picking up 8 of them from New York Central. And what was weird about those was not necessarily the cars, but the trucks that were under at least one of them. Some of you might recognize those as what you would see more in place under like a Southern Pacific articulated diner. Yeah, kind of a weird place to find it under a commuter coach, but it did exist and it did run like that, although the B&M quickly put the original style back under the cars they bought. So these things ended up all over the place. Once time went on, it was more than just the B&A, New York Central, Chicago Northwestern. The Long Island Railroad picked up a bunch of them at that point, third hand, from the Delaware and Hudson, who picked up a bunch of them. The Boston and Maine picked up a bunch of them. New York Susquehanna and Western picked up 2 of them, which is where one of these surviving coaches comes from. It was one of their coaches that they had picked up. The D&H actually used at least 2 of their cars in their name train, specifically the Adirondack. They also ended up using one as a training coach, where they basically set it up for teaching people how air brake systems worked, because they just, they happened to have it lying around. But for such a numerous car, because when you look at this, there's way more of these that were built than, say, the Lackawanna coaches we see at museums everywhere, or the Canadian National Heavyweights that are at various spots throughout the Northeast. it comes down to when these things were retired. They basically ran from the mid 1920s into the 60s and into the late 60s before they were thrown out. And by that point, they were worn out. They did the job, and that was to move a lot of people at once as quickly and efficiently as possible. So what got me interested in these is, well, they were basically built in my backyard. And I had never seen one in O scale. Now you're going, oh, this is we're talking about an HO scale one. And to be fair, when I designed the car to be easily able to scale it down. It's easier to scale something down when you're drawing it than to scale it up. Of course, you can only scale it down to such a point. I've got a bunch of people in N scale who've been asking about these, and I'm trying to figure out, how do I scale it down further than what I've scaled it down to? But it's a process. The HO scale one was the obvious one. These were never done in O scale, so I did that. But then the HO ones, the only examples I could find were the old Railworks brass, which are kind of hard to find at this point because those things were built 40 years ago and there was a limited number of them to begin with anyway. But yeah, these things ended up all over the place. Various short lines ended up with them. The Otter Valley ended up with a bunch of them, although all of those cars are now scrapped. They were scrapped about, I think, 2013. A bunch of them ended up at the Colony shops in New York. So at this point, there's 5 survivors. 2 of them are of the coach pattern, and are either one of them is definitely one of the original batch of B&A cars. Would have been number 335. That's at the Whitewater Valley in Indiana. The second one is a little bit harder to pin down because it looks like it was one of the D&H cars, but it's not clear what cars the D&H bought from the New York Central. So the New York Central did renumber the B&A cars into their series, but when you look at what the D&H bought, there's really no clear records I've yet found on what cars were what and where exactly they came from. And that car is also a lot more different. It's basically was gutted internally and turned into almost a small, think almost like an Amfleet Cafe car type deal. There's a small kitchen in it, table seating. Basically, it's used as part of a dinner train. And then you've got the 3 combines. One of the combines is, of course, the Whitewater Valley in Indiana. There's another combine at Illinois Railway Museum and another at the Oklahoma Railway Museum. So there's 5 of these things floating around out of over 200 of just a basic workman-like coach that was meant to do a job. And the ones that are still around are still doing it. So now, as far as kit stuff goes, like I said, we did it as an HO scale kit, 3D printed. And the idea was to not just make a car that's hard to find in HO scale, because they are hard to find, but to also make it so it's easier to assemble, because I'm a single guy doing this. If I could build every car and send them out ready to run, I absolutely would, but I physically can't do it because there's only so much time in the day. That's why I tried to design the kit as easy as possible to assemble, while at the same time giving someone something that's unique, which is kind of the track I'm taking. With that said, I think why don't we stop for a second and ask if anyone has any questions? Because I have been rambling on what seems like a impromptu TED Talk. Well, what do you guys think? Does anyone have any questions?
So I'm assuming you're doing it like almost like an IKEA flat pack.
So no. So the car, the body and frame are basically printed as single pieces. So the body is basically a single piece and the frame is a single piece that the detail parts mount onto, whether it be the seats for the interior. Yes, it has seats, although it follows the B&A's seat only pattern. Under frame detail. Basically the few things you need for HO scale, which I could not reliably design for HO scale or are already sitting in someone's tool drawer. Wire for brakes and grabs. Window glazing, which I recommend like acetate or Lexan. And then what was the other one? I'm having a moment. I was doing so well. And then you've got the seats, you've got your parts, you can get the truck frames come with the coach itself, But when you order it, you can decide, okay, do I need wheels and couplers or do I already have them? So you could save a couple bucks there. When I look at the old Railworks cars, they're like, what, $300 or more. With the wheels and couplers, the shipping, you're at basically half that. It's 150 plus the shipping with the wheels and couplers without the discount for what we're doing here. But I wouldn't call it a flat pack. I would basically call it, and that's one of the things that 3D printing lets us get away with. Like the O scale one, I was able to do a lot more with because one, I had to go to a specialist because of how big it is in O scale. But like O scale, I was able to do the whole car as two pieces, body and frame that just screwed together. HO scale, a little bit trickier because one, it's a lot smaller, more fragile. The stuff can be more fragile. But at the same time, trying to clean all that up with the equipment we've got here in the US, okay, it was going to be safer in the long run to do it as, okay, how do you mount these parts? There's, whether it be index holes, whether it be stuff slotted to go in a certain spot, just to make it easier. And that's kind of the design philosophy I've taken with all of the kits that I've done, to be honest. It's keep it simple, because in someone who's new, who's never done it before, odds are they're going to be successful because it's a lot easier. Someone who's experienced, hey, it's something that someone, like I look at Al Judy in 0-30 as an example of someone who could crank out a locomotive fully painted and running in less than 6 hours. So basically something that anyone at any skill level can easily do and be successful with. Oh, the only other thing we don't have is paint because,
Yeah.
I go to Maycomber for that.
Well, Earl Hackett's with us tonight. Earl's going to be the one building this kit on the show. Earl, you want to share any thoughts with us?
Yeah. Yeah, we have I looked at a early version of it, and it's dead easy to build. The body just mounts on the frame. Seats just mount on, they're all positioned inside. The only tricky part might be putting in the doors, mounting doors in there. And the brake rigging underneath the brake rigging is probably the hardest part of the whole model to put together if you're interested in seeing brake rigging. But otherwise, it's just two main pieces and some detail work. The trucks are absolutely beautiful. They're really nice. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing the final version of it, and probably got to do a New York Central paint job.
Anything special modelers need to be able to build along with you, Earl?
Well, the only thing special, I'm knowing the limitations of 3D printing. The inside of the journals are probably going to be pretty rough because you just can't. They're just not going to be the smooth machine journals that you expect from an injection molding or what. So what I'm looking at is using a 60-degree drill. Now there is one called the Micromart makes it. It's a truck journal.
Yeah,
pruning.
I know the one. I know the tool you're talking about.
Yeah, you stick it on there, you twist it around.
Yeah, you twist and it cleans up the journals.
Yeah.
The O scale truck was so much easier to keep that with because it was multiple pieces because it was sprung. The HO scale one springs that tiny are going to drive everyone insane, including me. Don't need me going insane as the designer, so let's avoid that. But at the same time, and you do bring up a good point, so far, haven't run into an issue, but you can't guarantee that all the time once you scale it down and you print it as a single piece.
Yeah.
That tool is your best friend as far as printing with a resin truck like this.
Yeah. That was my only concern with 3D printing on a truck was the journal boxes, and they should be. You put that thing in there, 2 twists, and you're done. Fixes it right up.
Yeah. Dylan, what kind of discounts you're offering for this model?
So basically, we are offering, I think it was 20% off the list price. So it's the code. I think it was NTRAC or NewTrack. I'm having a moment, Jim. Save me. I believe it was NTRAC was the exact code. So when you go, so 3DP out of Tennessee, I work with Dave Kamenek to make these because he he does 3D printing. When I first started, I did a lot of stuff myself. When you're a one-man show, it's basically a triangle of there's 3 points on a triangle of what your priorities are: production, design, or packing those orders. For me, because I have a full-time job outside of this, it became a lot easier to do the design work and the packing with the time I've got. So a lot of the production I've outsourced over the years to people who I know are capable of doing it. A lot of the stuff I've done, I've used a lot of nylon. It's only in the last year I've started getting back into resin, because now the resin cost compared to, say, nylon or other materials from powder-based prints, it's comparable at this point. And it just, in some of the resins, it's similar durability and it looks better. Nothing personal. I'm going to go with what looks better as long as it works. I don't want it to be fragile and, someone accidentally like breathes on it and it shatters into a million pieces. Not what I want to have to happen to people, because then you're not going to have a good time. If you don't enjoy what you do, you're going to look and go, that sucked. You're going to throw it in a box. You're never going to think about it again. That's not really my style. I want you to enjoy what you build. So, and if you're building along with us, you get a discount on it. When you go to 3DP's website, when you go to the checkout, there's going to be a spot to punch in that code, punch it in, take the number right off. They'll take the discount right off it, and you'll be off and running. And like I said, you can save yourself a couple bucks if you don't need the wheels and couplers. Like, let's say you got like me, where I've got, 50 KD 148s in one box, and I don't even know how many wheel sets at this point, because I stocked them for parts for other kits. Well, if you've got the wheels and couplers, yeah, maybe it's only, like $7 thereabouts. But it's $7 that, hey, maybe you could use it for something else.
Yep.
Do you need window glazing? Are you trying to find decals for that, or trying to make decals for that weird D&H instruction car? Because I've got one of the guys in O-Scale building it as that. And he's trying to, because he's like, ooh, I'm going to do that, because it's just that weird factor of nobody's done it. Frees up some dollars in it. Now, to be fair, with what was already available, this is already a lot more cost effective, which I like keeping more money in my pocket too. Don't get me wrong. I do it as a business, but if you don't, I rather would help people out too. If I can make it cost effective too, great.
Exactly.
You can afford to do it.
So Dylan, can I go to your website and get all this information I need?
Yes, you can. You could go to lambertlocomotiveworks.com. The page for the HO scale car is cross-linked on the LLW website. It'll take you to the 3DP trains checkout, which is where it runs through, because me and Dave are like, it's just going to be easier to use his website code for that one, instead of trying to figure out how do you connect like 3 different back-end systems to do one thing. Yeah, we were just both scratching our heads like, yeah, let's not make this more complicated than it has to. Let's just go through the checkout system with you, because then it works, and I'll just link it in. So when you go right to it, it's right there. There is an instruction packet. Now, with my instructions that I've done historically, they can get a little bit lengthy. Like the record holder right now is Tom York's old junkyard dog. When I bought that design from him and I did my own instructions, his instructions were 2 pages, mine are 43, because I have pictures before and after of every step, because, OCD kicked it, I guess.
Yeah.
Definitely had a little bit of OCD going with that one. Well, I'm like, no, we're going to cover everything. And then I didn't pay attention to the page count until the end. So there is actually a link on the 3DP page where you could pull up that digital file. If for some reason you can't print it out, I tell people this at shows, I tell people if they email me, if you can't print it out for whatever reason, or it's just like, look, I'm not computer savvy, I could use a hand. I'm an email away, I'm a phone call away. My contact info is up on the Lambert Locomotive Works website. It's up on our Facebook page. It's going to be on the Patreon page too. Yes, we set up a Patreon because why not? Give people another way to support it. Maybe you can't throw out $150 for a kit, but maybe you could throw out $5 or $6 to help, offset some of the costs of developing this stuff. because it's not just finding drawings. Some of the stuff I'm going to have to physically go out to actually look at it to figure it out, which means calling the people that own it. Hey, can I come in and not get arrested because I'm trespassing, because I'm just waltzing right in and I don't have Kevin Maycomber's level of sheer dumb luck of being able to get away with that. So yeah, there's stuff I'm going to have to go out and look at. Like I want to do a Mac FCD, that rail bus, because I can power it. I have a mechanism that works for it perfectly, but when you look at the drawings and you're like, okay, that's really weird, like the nose on it, you have to physically go out, find one to go look at. That's gas, that's time, that's equipment you're going to need to be able to properly measure it. A pair of calipers that I would use on my desk to measure a model ain't going to cut it with a full-size piece of equipment. So it's another way people could. So there's the Patreon. That's our contact's going to be on there. It's on our website. It's on our Facebook. I'm a pretty open book. Just when I'm at the day job, it's a little bit tricky to answer the phone, but I will get back to you as soon as possible and make sure we get you all squared away.
What a lot of you may not know, when I first started these shows 4 years ago, Dylan was my first telephone call, because I'd only been to one Zoom show in my life, had no idea how to do it technically. And Dylan was the technical wizard for probably the first 2 years that we did.
Yeah, about 2 years before I handed that baton off. And that was Maycomber's fault. I wouldn't even say Maycomber's fault. That was him saying, hey, I know someone who could do it, and him giving you my phone number.
Yes, he did. But anyway, those were learning days for both of us. I'll tell you, if we thought we knew what we were getting involved in, we had no idea.
No, 2 years ago, when we're just sitting here on because everyone's stuck at home and we're all bored out of our gourds and going stir crazy. Yeah, no, we had no idea what we were doing back then.
Absolutely.
We certainly do now, which is very good.
Dylan, thanks so much. Earl, thank you so much for being here tonight. I look forward to seeing the bill in December, and look forward to seeing some of the models that are built on the My Bill shows later. So guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, very good.
Thanks, Dylan.
Have a good one, guys.
Yes, sir.